Now to take your Bibles. If there are any young people left that need to escape, now would be the time to escape. And if you would, we're going to turn to Philippians chapter 1. And we're going to read just the last 4 verses. Philippians 1, starting at verse 27. It says, "Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel, and not in any way terrified by your adversaries, which is to them a proof of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. For to you it has been granted on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake, having the same condition in which you saw in me, and now here is in me." You know, this is one of those passages that gives away the concluding highlight statement in the very first line. You're like, but you're going to take a long time to explain it. Yup. But the overarching statement is right at the very beginning. It says, "Let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ." I'm going to read it also out of the New International Version. It says, "Whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel." Adds a little bit to it, doesn't it? Not just only let, but whatever happens, let your conduct. That kind of, to use the phrase of getting us off the hook, it kind of doesn't let us off the hook, does it? Whatever happens. Whatever kind of means, I don't know, whatever. No matter what is coming into our life, we need to let our conduct match what the gospel teaches. In what I read initially in the New King James Version, and I think a few others, it does use the word only. That carries the idea of just one thing. Paul's looking at the Philippians, and he's in jail. He has no idea if he's going to get out of jail. He has no idea if he's ever going to see the Philippians again. And he's saying, just one thing I want you to know. You know, we're in verse 27 of a 4-chapter thing. Well, if you only have one thing, Paul, yeah, there's more stuff. But this is the one thing that he wants them to know. That no matter what happens in their lives, and again, what was he just talking about? It's been a couple weeks, but he's saying, whether I live or whether I die, I'm going to be content. I'm going to keep the main thing the main thing. He's saying, no matter what happens. So this isn't just, if I get a flat tire today. It's a little bit more important than that. None of us want a flat tire, do we? No, I'm okay with that. If I get a flat tire between here and the house, we have a problem. But the point is, it's not just that trouble. He's talking about even up until death. And in that death, he's saying, I still win. Because I'm going to be with God. But he's saying here that there is nothing that we can come up with and say, I don't have to live according to the gospel anymore. I've been there. I have 4 kids that try this on a regular basis. When you give them something to do, but you don't understand this. But. Have we ever done that with God? I'm going to put my hand up high because I've been there. All right? What he's saying is, there is nothing. It doesn't matter. I've been there as a parent that they can open their mouth. I know what they're going to say. And it doesn't matter because I know more. because I'm smarter than them. That may last a little bit longer, but I know something they don't know. Do you think God knows something we don't know? One or two or three things. He's saying there's one thing. Whatever happens, this is the most important thing that I'm going to say to you is no matter what happens, let your conduct match the gospel. The word worthy, probably not a word that we use in our regular vocabulary. If we were to take all of our words in the next week, outside of singing praise choruses and hymns, would we use the word worthy? Not likely. Maybe it does, but the simple definition here is to even the beam. You're like, you said simple. But it's talking about a balance scale. Of when the beam is even, it means it's level. They're equal. I was visiting Alice's mom the other day, and Price is Right was on. I saw a new game I never got to see before, and it was balancing. The lady didn't win the car. But I'm like, it was a scale, and it was balancing. You had to put the right amount of money on one end so that it balanced with the other. It's kind of fun. But it'd been more fun for her if she'd have won. But that's the idea here, is of balancing the scale so that both sides are even. So if we are to live worthy of the gospel, it is to give the proper weight to all that God has done for us. I'll be honest with you, as I wrote that down, I'm sitting here going, there is nothing I could put on my side of the scale that could make that scale even, right? Nothing I could do. And again, we're not supposed to do this in and of our own strength. That's fruitless. But we're supposed to live worthy of the gospel. Reading this out of the Message translation, I think it adds a little bit. It says, live in such a way that you are a credit to the message of Christ. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you, that doesn't work most of the time for me, does it? Does it work for you that you're living a credit to the message of the gospel? There are days I fall so far short that balance scale would be heavily one side or the other. But that's what Paul is saying. This is the most important thing, that we live that way. Is he expecting the Philippians, or that matter us, to do it perfectly? Do you think Paul did it perfectly? No, he was human. But that's what we need to strive for. Chuck Colson once was walking through a college and saw a college-age demonstrator holding a sign saying that nothing is worth dying for. And Chuck Colson's response was, then nothing's worth living for. If there's something not worth dying for, then what's really worth living for? Paul is saying that the gospel is worth living for. And by his own life, worth dying for. And the other word I wanted to look at, and it goes back a couple words, but it's the word conduct. Live what we are. As Christians, what are we? We're citizens of heaven. Then we should live like we're citizens of heaven. Do we live in such a way that we prove our identity? Do we prove who we are? Are we... I don't know. There have been times in life, sometimes, that we see, and we can see from a distance that someone's from away. Sometimes it's the way people drive. Right? I watch cars on the road all the time, and I look at license plates, and I can see before they ever get here that they're from away. Usually I can guess what the license plate is. But it's known by how they act. There was somewhere the other day, like I said, I went to Portland the other day, and I'm watching this car and I'm going, you're dumb. It's not making any sense at all. And then I looked at the license plate and I went, oh, yeah, okay. You know, it's not like it's an excuse for it, but it does act that way, doesn't it? It's like, oh, now I understand. Does our license plate say heaven? We should live in such a way that that's the case. That people know that we aren't from around here. That we have a different location. We may be temporarily dwelling here, but we have a greater place to be. You know, there's three things that we could take away from just this little bit right here. One, and we've already kind of said it, but our lives as Christians should be different. They should be changed. Our location, our destination is changed, so we should be changed. The second thing is, the world makes opinions of Christ based on how we live. We make a lot of decisions in life, opinions in life, based on how someone drives, right? All of you knew exactly what I was meaning, and I never had to say where I was meaning. Right? Not going there. But we all make opinions based on what we see on that license plate. Where we see on that license plate. And we're like, oh yeah. Not that it excuses it, like I said, but we're like, we have an opinion about them based on that. The world makes opinions about us based on what we display. I have resisted for years putting anything on the backside of my car that says I'm a Christian. For multiple reasons. One of which I know I don't drive like it most of the time. Or some of the time, I should say. Some of the time. You know, if I go speeding by someone down the highway, that I don't do often, but there have been times, I don't want that on the back of my car. Right? Does anybody understand what I'm saying? All right? I know the deceitfulness and the deception of my own heart. I don't want people making opinions of Christ based on what they see on my car. Guess what's more important than my car? My heart. People see my heart. I can't disguise that. Especially when they come up to you and say, so what do you do for a living? I'm a pastor. Oh. All right? You can't hide that. Some of you can get away with that in a little bit different way. Because you have another job. But ultimately, who are we? We're followers of Christ. We need to live differently. Because they are going to make their opinion. The third thing is, how we live makes a huge impact. It's not just, I can do what I want. I've heard that before. It's up to me. It's not that. Because how we live makes a huge impact. See, Paul, again, had no guarantee that he would get out of jail. This was the one thing that he wanted them to know. It was the one thing that he thought was the most important thing that the Philippians need to hear. If that was all they got. So, all that to say, that's all fine and good. How do we do that? How do we live worthy of the gospel? I think what we find in the rest of this verse and the next three is some ideas, some encouragements to how to do that. The first we see is right there in verse 27, that you stand fast in one spirit. Stand fast, okay? What does that mean? It's not a word we use in those words that we use in those combinations very often. But the idea would be back then of Roman soldiers. What was their defensive position? They would stand shoulder to shoulder, shields out, spears out. Are you going to get through them if they're standing shoulder to shoulder? I remember playing the game when we're kids of, was it Red Rover, send someone right over and we clothesline somebody? Is that about right? If we get that arm just in the right place, we could take them out right there. But as soldiers standing with shields and right next to the other, are you going to get through that? No. He's saying stand fast. That's what the soldiers did. That's what he's giving to a people that would understand entirely what he meant. That's what it means to stand fast. This was the strongest defensive position. Stand fast. The idea behind that, those soldiers would be, if we win together. If we lose together. That at whatever they do, they were going to do it together. You know what happens in churches today? Not just meaning one or any church in particular. We let silly things divide us. Trivial things divide us. It doesn't just happen in churches, it happens in our nation. Watch the news. Won't take you 5 minutes, you'll see it. Especially on Sunday. Because I guarantee you after about 1:30 today, it'll be all through social media and everywhere again. Silly things divide us. Things that in the end of things don't matter at all. Paul is encouraging them to not use the phrase over and over again, but I'm going to keep the main thing the main thing. Defend what's important and defend together. You know, the world today is full of things that separate. Are there issues in our world that are being demonstrated or whatever that are important? Absolutely. You know, in our world, still, for whatever reason, racism is a problem. It is something that needs to be dealt with. Because God loves us all equally, so we should love each other equally. We should move on from it. And as one of the, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago on Sunday night, is it important? Yes. But we have millions of babies being killed every day. Guess what we're not talking about anymore? Abortions. Because we're dealing with race, which is an issue. But it's a distraction from what's really important. Not that it isn't important, but there are bigger things. What about in churches? Do we ever, in churches, it's easy to point at culture, it's a whole other thing to point at churches, isn't it? Do we ever get worried about little things? You know, maybe just to point at an old one, color of paint on a wall. Hopefully we get to do that in here at some point, but let's hope we don't argue about it, right? Do we ever, in whether it's individual churches or churches as a whole, do we argue about things? Music's one of those. You want to push a button, push on music. Every church has got an opinion that theirs is right. You know what matters? The gospel. Bible versions, that's another fun one. What matters? The gospel. Paul is saying the gospel is what is important. We can spend far too much time arguing over secondary things that we fail to accomplish the main thing, the preaching of the gospel. You know, I have had the privilege since I think it was March or so to be invited to a pastor's breakfast. It's at Moody's. Somebody else pays. Best thing ever. All right? But you know, there are 8 different guys that showed up last Wednesday. There's a lot of things we don't agree on. There's a lot of theology. I could go around the room and point at people and say, this is what they believe, this is what they believe, this is what they believe. And we don't agree. But you know what? It's all secondary. Are there things that we need to stand on? Yeah. But what's most important? Breakfast. No. The gospel. The gospel is what's important. Every one of those men is standing up this morning and preaching the gospel in their church. That's what's important. Again, Are the other issues okay? Are they important? Yeah, but they're not as important as preaching the gospel. You know, what makes the gospel so attractive to the world around us is our unity and our love for each other. So we need to stand fast in that. You know, the church as a whole, and we have all said, God is... Okay, that was less impressive. God is love. Is God love? Then why does the world see us squabbling over silly things? Right? They understand God is love. They may not believe in God, but they understand the concept. Why do they see us squabbling over silly things? Second thing we see, also in verse 27, with one mind striving together for the faith of the gospel. Striving or contending goes back to the Greek, to the word that we also get the English word athlete. And striving is the same idea, to put it in a modern perspective, and this afternoon perspective, of a running back taking the football and pushing for everything that he's worth to get it across that goal line. You ever seen that happen before? Most football games have it happen at least once. I've seen a guy run into a pile of other guys and just push, hoping that his guys are bigger than their guys. I've seen other guys starting to get tackled, and what do? They reach out and push forward to get that across the goal line. Other guys jump. That just doesn't make any sense at all to me. Because what are you going to land on? Another pile of big fat guys. All right? But it might be soft, it might not be. But what is he doing? That goal of that guy is to get that ball across that plane. That's what he's saying that our goal is. That we to be striving for the faith of the gospel. Full effort to get the gospel out. I'm a fairly competitive guy. If I'm playing in a sport, I don't like losing. I don't care if it's a board game with my kids. I don't like losing. And the idea of letting them win, that's just not going to happen. It isn't going to happen. The best way for them to earn self-esteem is to learn how bad they are and grow up. We were playing a game the other night. Sidelight. Oh my goodness, it's already... I told you I was going to go late. We were playing a game the other night, and Tyler wasn't home. And Alyssa went, Tyler's so bad at this game. He's just awful at it. Don't tell him how I beat him every time. I'm like, that's my girl. Because I wouldn't tell him either. But he's awful at it. And Melissa is as dry can be. Just like, don't tell him. The rest of us sat there and laughed for 10 minutes. We could not figure it out. How to get back together and play. But do I do the same thing with the gospel? There was a point to my illustration. I almost forgot it, but am I striving for everything that there is for the gospel? I can push and push and push, and I don't want to lose. But do we ever have that same drive when it comes to the gospel? To preaching the word? You know, the last point was a very defensive stand. You know, with the soldiers, it was saying, we need to defend. Striving is the exact opposite. That's a very offensive stance. So we need to defend, but we also need to go. You know, I find that a lot of people get happy in one or the other. A lot of people get really happy defending. Other people get really happy going. And each one forgets that we need to do the other. We need to do both. You know, the idea here, as it even mentions, the faith. It's not talking about our faith, but the core beliefs of a Christian, theology, if you will. What we know to be true. And what it means is that we, kind of taking the two together, is we need to unite together as a group of people, not just in this church, but other churches, and unite together and do everything that we can to defend and give the gospel at all costs, whatever, and by every means that is possible. Quick outline, I'm just going to have Bill throw it on the screen for a second. This is not original to me. I stole it from Ray Pritchard. And it said on the bottom, if you want to use it, you can use it. So steal is kind of a relative word. It says, there is a faith that we must believe. That faith is worth striving for. That faith must not be compromised. That faith is the basis of our unity. And that faith should be preached in all the earth. That's what we need to be doing. So going back to what Paul said is there's one thing that's the most important, that your conduct be worthy. And if we're making and defending our faith, that's what he's saying is important. There is an aggressiveness here. Look at the Great Commission. Whether you look in Matthew or Mark, what does it say? Go. Understood that you're going to be going. There is an aggressiveness here. The next thing, and that obviously comes, verse 28, and not in any way terrified by your adversaries, which is to them a proof of perdition, but to you of salvation. I just want to read that because I read that and I'm going, okay, I understand that, but it needs to be a little bit simpler. So in the ESV it reads, and do not be frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but your salvation, which is from God. Paul tends to be a little bit blunt. He's not calling it easy. He says it like it is. And what he's basically saying is here, speak up. People aren't going to like it, but do it anyway. Don't stop. Going back to what he said in the last passage, what are they going to do? What if they kill me, I'm going to be in heaven. If I'm still here, I get to preach more. What are they going to do? Not going to go back there, but Julia? No. Going back to Psalm 27, which we looked at on Sunday, or Wednesday. Who shall I fear? God is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I be afraid? He is the strength of my life. Why? Who am I going to be afraid of? David was confident in the resurrection, and because of that, he was fearless. Paul is saying the same exact thing here. He's using different words, but he's saying the same exact thing. When we're opposed, what he's saying is we can be confident in our salvation, because the opposition reveals the fact that we are in opposition to something, right? And we're in opposition to the world. He's also saying, and again, he's blunt with this, but we can be confident of their destruction. That the opposition is going to lose. So we can be confident that Christ is giving us the victory, but also that they're not going to get victory. May not happen right now, but it's going to happen. We stand for, I wrote everything, I suppose at least many things that the world is against. Do we not? If we pick one or two major issues, we're going to stand against what the world believes. Shouldn't opposition be understood as coming? It should. We should expect it. And what he's saying is, don't be terrified. Don't be even surprised at opposition. The word terrified there is, and I do this to a certain extent, the word terrified is the same as a horse getting startled by a noise when it's walking. I do it in the morning when I'm walking. I have my headphones in. Do you know how unaware that makes me of everything around? About halfway up the road, there's this little tiny bunny rabbit. Do you know how unimpressive a bunny rabbit is on its own? Do you know how scary it is when all you hear is the grass wiggling through your headphones? Whoa! And it's this little tiny bunny. It's not impressive at all. Not scary at all. But what's the first instinct? To go away from it. He's saying, don't be afraid of opposition. It's going to come. Expect it to be there. But don't be afraid of it. It happens. The last thing really is in 29 and 30. For to you it has been granted on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. Really, he's giving two blessings. We get the blessing of being able to believe in him, but also to suffer. Anybody blessed by that? All in favor? No. It's not a blessing in the sense that we like to think of blessings. But both are a privilege. Mark 8:31. I'm just going to read it real quick. I know I'm short on time. Jesus says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this word openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. It's easy to poke fun at Peter, but why, Jesus, you're perfect. Why would you have to suffer at all? Wouldn't we have done that? And Jesus, but when he turned around and looked at his disciples, and he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan." I'm sure that was a blessing. You know, just being called Satan is a blessing, right? I'm sure. But Jesus knew that suffering was inevitable. It was going to come. That no matter how perfectly he lived his life, you know, Peter's problem, there was no cross in his gospel. There was no cross. Because in order for the gospel to have full effect, there had to be the cross. The cross was not fun. The cross was not easy. But how many times in life do we think that the Christian life should be easy? We know the reality of it isn't. It's just not. But we think it should be. It's not. It wasn't easy for Christ. It's not going to be easy for us. But we're to see it as a privilege. That we get a small opportunity, and I use the word small somewhat carefully, because things seem very big to us. But in light of everything else, our suffering is small. Verse 28 says, in light of verse 28, our suffering is seen as a guarantee of our salvation. We could know based on the fact that we are suffering that we're standing with God. Now, on the other hand, we mentioned this a couple weeks ago, we can sometimes suffer just from being dumb. You know? David said that. Don't suffer for being dumb, my translation. But we can, don't do things that you know are going to just get you to suffer. But if you do what is right, which Jesus obviously did, that didn't work out well for him from a human standpoint. God's economy is different than ours. He kind of closes in verse 30, it says, having the same conflict you saw in me, and now here is in me. He goes, he was speaking to the Philippians the idea of that you know what my sufferings are, and now you're going to get a taste of them. That's coming. Don't be surprised. Don't be scared. God is in control. So as we close up here, as we live in manner of the gospel, in worthy of the gospel, we need to stand fast and strive together, and not be surprised when opposition comes and when suffering comes. This is what Paul is telling the Philippians is going to help them be worthy. We need to live so that the world can see him, not us. Not say, what a nice guy you are. We need to live so that we can show him to the world. And again, just to reread the sentence that I read at the beginning, to live worthy of the gospel is to give proper weight to all that God has done for us. It's the only appropriate response to what God has done for us, is to live worthy of it. To live in a manner that we are, so to speak, grateful for it, that we're living out our thankfulness. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for the reality of the gospel. What your word says here is the faith, Lord, that has reached down and made it available to every one of us. The fact that if we trust you and repent of our own sin and striving to reach you on our own, that if we turn from that we find grace before you. Lord, help us live worthy of that grace. That the world around us would not see humans who figured out how to live nice, but they'd see servants of yours living in light of you. That they would see you living through us. We ask this in your name. Amen.